Hi, today we're going to be learning how to calculate the surface area and volume of cones. Before we do that, let's talk about how to derive the formulas for the volume and surface area of a cone. We're going to start off with volume, so let's take a minute to watch this video and fill out these blanks over here. It takes how many cones to fill a cylinder? So from the video, we can see that it takes 3 cones to fill a cylinder, which means the volume of a cone is 1/3 the volume of a cylinder. So if I take the volume of a cylinder, which we learned in our previous video was pi r squared h, if I take this and just divide this by 3, that's going to be the volume of our cone. Or another way that we can write it is 1/3 times pi r squared times h. So this is the formula that we'll be using in this video. Now let's talk about surface area of a cone. So I want to start off by thinking about the surface area for the sides of a pyramid. Notice that each of the sides on a pyramid are triangular shapes. So essentially what we've been doing is we've been taking the area of our triangles. So I'm just going to write area of a triangle. And we've been multiplying it by however many triangles there are. In this case, a way that we can represent this is by saying the number of triangles or the number of sides in the base of the pyramid. So how can I rewrite this? Well, the area of a triangle can be rewritten as 1/2 times base times height. We're going to multiply that by the number of sides can be represented by the variable n. So n stands for number of sides. We can simplify this down. So 1/2 is just going to remain 1/2. But another way that we can think about base times number of sides is essentially that is the length all the way around the base, which is called the perimeter. So the length all the way around is called the perimeter. So I'm going to use capital P to represent that. So this is the same thing as b times n. And then we're going to multiply it by the height of the triangle. But notice that the height of the triangle in here is not represented by the letter H, but rather by the letter S. S stands for the slant height. So H and S mean the same thing. So this is the formula that you'll often see on Google or in a textbook when they're talking about the lateral area or the area of the sides of a pyramid. So that's going to be 1/2 times the perimeter times the slant height. But how does that relate to the surface area for the side of a cone? Well, if we think about the difference between this pyramid and a cone, this pyramid's base is in the shape of a square, whereas the base of the cone is a circular shape. So if I want to translate this, we can say 1/2 times, instead of perimeter, what's another way that we can say perimeter of a circle? Well, we call that the circumference. So perimeter and circumference are going to mean the same thing. And then we're still going to be multiplying it by the slant height. Well, let's simplify this. 1/2 is going to again remain the same. We know the circumference of a circle formula is 2 times pi times r. So this was the same thing as this. And then we're still going to be multiplying it by the slant. So if I want to condense this down, 1/2 times 2 is essentially going to cancel each other out. So I'm left with just 1 here. And all I'm left with is pi times r times s. So pi times r times s. And that's going to be the formula for surface area of the side of a cone. So we can just write that as pi times r times s. Now let's solve for this cone. So I'm going to be starting off with surface area. And for the surface area of a cone, notice that this time we have a bottom. And the only other part that I need to solve for is the side of the cone that wraps all the way around right here. So just the bottom and the side. Let's start off with this bottom part right here. So I noticed that this is the shape of a circle. We know the area of a circle is pi r squared. So I'm going to start with pi times, my r in this case is going to be 5 squared. If I want to multiply pi times 5 squared, I'm just going to be using 3.14 as the approximation. So all of this gets me 78.5. So that's my bottom. To calculate the area of this side part right here, remember we just figured out how to do that in the previous slide. So we're going to be doing pi times r times s. So I'm starting off with pi times my r is 5 times s is the slant height. So in this case, it's going to be 13. If I multiply all of this together, that's going to get me 204.1. Now let's add each of these sides together. So I'm going to be adding 78.5 plus 204.1. That's going to get me 282.6 inches squared. And that's my surface area. Now let's break down what we just did. So for the surface area, we started off with using our radius right here. So this is my radius r. We took pi and we multiplied it by r squared. So that's the first part I'm going to add to my formula, pi times r squared. Then we added that to this part down here. So we use the radius and this right here, the slant height, to do pi times the radius times the slant. And that's going to form the second part of our formula. So pi times r times s. And just to condense this down, we can rewrite it like this. And that's the formula for surface area of a cone. Now let's move on to the volume. So for the volume, just like for our cylinder, we're going to take the area of the base, which in this case is 78.5, and we're going to multiply it by the height, or however many layers there are. In this case, it's going to be 12. But remember in the video that we watched, we also want to multiply this by 1/3 or divide all of this by 3 to get the volume of the cone. If I multiply all of this together, that's going to get me 314, and our units are inches cubed, and that's the volume. To break down what we just did for the volume, essentially we took 1/3, we multiplied it by the area of the base, which is represented by our capital B, and then we multiplied that by the height. In this case, this was our height over here, the 12. But how can we simplify this a little bit more? So instead of capital B, essentially what we did for that was we took pi times r squared. So what I can write instead is pi r squared and then multiply that by h. So this is the formula for volume of a cone. All right, now let's try this cone. So I'm going to start off with my surface area. And remember, we're only going to need to solve for two sides. So I have the bottom and the side. Let's start off with this bottom right here. I noticed that this is a circle, so the area of a circle is pi r squared. So I'm starting off with pi, but my r in this case is not going to be 8. 8 is the full length right here, the diameter. In order to get the radius, I need to take half of the diameter. So half of 8 is going to get me 4. So I'm going to do pi times 4 squared. All of this multiplied is going to get me 50.24. Now let's move on to solving for this side part that wraps all the way around the cone. So remember for that, that's going to be pi times our r, which in this case is 4, times our slant, which in this case is going to be 10. All of this multiplied is going to get me 125.6. If I add up both of my sides, I'm going to get a total of 175.84. And my units are feet squared. So that's the surface area. Now, if I want to try applying this formula over here, it's going to be the same exact thing. So I'm going to start off by labeling my dimensions. So I have r and s. So remember, this was my r, and then here was my s. So to plug that into the formula, I start with pi times r squared. So that's going to be pi times 4 squared. We're going to add that to pi times r times s. So pi times r, which is 4, times s, which is 10. To simplify this, it ends up getting me the same exact thing. So this is going to be 50.24 if I multiply these two. We're going to add that to 125.6 if I multiply these. And then again, I end up with 175.84 feet squared as my surface area. Now to solve for the volume, we're going to take 1/3. We're going to multiply it by the area of the base or the bottom, which is 50.24. And then we're going to multiply it by the height of the cone, which in this case is going to be 9. If I multiply all of these together, that's going to get me 150 150.72 feet cubed. And that's the volume. If I want to try applying this formula right here, I'm going to do 1/3 times pi times r squared, which is going to be 4 squared, and then times my height. Remember, the height was this part right here, so 9 is going to be my height, so I'm just going to be multiplying it by 9. All of this multiplied again gets me the exact same thing, 150.72 feet cubed. And that's how you solve for the surface area and volume of a cone. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, subscribe, and comment with any questions or topics you'd like to see next. Bye!